before this story begins. If you've ever loved someone you didn't deserve, if you've ever made a choice that cost you everything, stay until the end. This one will hit you somewhere deep. Drop a like and tell me in the comments. What city are you watching from? I want to see how far this story travels. Now let's begin. Marcus had the first results by morning. He laid them out on the kitchen table the way he laid out everything, without drama, without editorial, just the facts arranged in the order they'd surfaced, printed on plain paper because Damian did not trust digital files for things that mattered. 3 sheets. Single-spaced. Damian stood over them with his coffee and read without sitting down, the way a man reads something he's been both dreading and needing in equal measure. Daniel Carver had been on the DeSantis payroll since 2011. Not 2012, 2011. A full year before he had walked into Damian's office and told him that Elena Marlowe was feeding information to their rivals. The payments were indirect, routed through a property management company in Cicero that had since been dissolved, but the trail existed if you knew where to look. And Marcus knew where to look because Marcus had spent 14 years learning exactly that. The amounts were not large. That was almost the worst part of it. The amounts were modest, careful, the payments of a man who understood that greed made trails and restraint made ghosts. Damian set down his coffee. He read the sheet again. Then the second sheet, which contained the timeline of Carver's communications with a mid-level DeSantis operative named Fitch, now deceased, killed in 2017 in what had been officially recorded as a parking garage robbery. The third sheet was a partial record of what Carver had provided: operational details, meeting locations, the names of 2 men who had subsequently disappeared. Not Elena. Elena's name appeared nowhere in what Carver had actually delivered to the DeSantis family, because Elena had had nothing to deliver. She had been a woman dating a man in a dangerous business, trying to hold on to something real inside something that was actively destroying her ability to do that, and Carver had used her existence, used the simple fact of her, as a weapon against Damian at the exact moment it would be most effective. He picked up the third sheet and held it. It was a thin piece of paper. It weighed almost nothing. He held it for a long time. Then he folded all 3 sheets precisely, along clean lines the way his mother had taught him to fold things when he was a boy in an apartment 6 blocks from here. And he put them in the inside pocket of his jacket, and he finished his coffee standing at the kitchen counter, and he did not allow himself to feel anything specific about what he'd just confirmed, because if he allowed that, right now, in this kitchen, he would not be able to function, and he needed to function. He called Marcus in from the hallway. "Is Carver still in the city?" "Bridgeview," Marcus said. "He's been there about 2 years, works at a heating and cooling supply place on Harlem, lives alone." "Don't go near him," Damian said. Marcus looked at him. "All right." "I mean it. Nobody goes near him." He set his cup in the sink. "Not yet." I went to the cafe at 9:15 on a Tuesday. He had thought about this for 2 days. He had thought about sending a letter, which was absurd. He had thought about calling, which was worse. Her voice on a phone with no warning, no control over the environment, no ability to read her face. He had thought about asking Marcus to make initial contact, which he had dismissed immediately because the idea of Elena receiving any version of this through an intermediary was offensive in a way he couldn't fully articulate but felt clearly. He had thought about not going at all. He had dismissed this last option in about 30 seconds, which told him something about where he actually was, whatever he was telling himself. He went alone. No Marcus, no car waiting at the curb, no one positioned anywhere in the surrounding block. He walked, as he had walked on the night this began, because walking was the only honest way to arrive at something you couldn't control. The cafe had 7 customers when he came in. The bell above the door made a small sound. A woman behind the counter looked up. Not Elena, a younger woman, early 20s, with her hair in a bun and flour on her forearm, and started to say something welcoming, and then she looked at him properly and said nothing, the way people sometimes went silent around him in rooms when they registered something about him that their bodies understood before their minds caught up. "Is Elena in?" he said. The young woman's eyes went to the back of the cafe, a reflex she couldn't suppress, and then back to him. Can I ask who's asking?" "Tell her Damian," he said. "She'll know." He waited at a table near the window. He did not take off his coat. He sat with his hands flat on the table and watched the street outside and listened to the sound of the cafe around him. The coffee machine, a conversation between two elderly men in the corner, the young woman's footsteps going toward the back, then stopping, then a silence, then footsteps coming back, and then different footsteps, slower and more deliberate. Elena came through the door from the back kitchen and stopped when she saw him. She was wearing a dark apron over a gray sweater, her hair pulled back, a small smear of something, coffee grounds maybe, or chocolate, on her left wrist. She looked older than the image he'd been carrying for 9 years, which was obvious and also somehow startling. She looked like a person who had lived through things, which was also obvious. What was not obvious, what he had not prepared himself for, was that she looked like herself. More herself than the version he'd been preserving in memory, less the outline of the girl he'd loved and more the full weight of the woman she'd become. And the full weight was harder to sit across from than he'd anticipated. She walked to his table and stopped on the other side of it. She did not sit. She looked at him with an expression that was not anger and not welcome and not grief. It was something more controlled than any of those, something she'd worked at. He could see the work in it. "You have a lot of nerve," she said. Her voice was quiet, which was worse than if she'd raised it. "I know," he said. "Don't do that," she said. "Don't agree with me right away. It's a tactic." He looked at her. "It's not a tactic." "Everything with you is a tactic, Damian. I spent 4 years learning that." He said nothing. She was right, and he was not going to argue with a woman who was right. Not today, not about this. She pulled out the chair across from him and sat down. But she sat like she might stand again in the next 10 seconds, her spine straight, her hands on the table. "You were outside 3 nights ago," she said. "Yes." "And before that?" He paused. "Yes." Something moved across her face. Not surprise. She'd known, clearly. She'd known for longer than 3 days. She'd just confirmed something she already suspected. "How long?" "I don't walk that street on purpose," he said. "I've been telling myself that for years." "That's not an answer." "I know." She looked at him for a long moment, the way she used to look at him when he was doing the thing he did. The thing where he controlled a room by controlling what he gave out of it. The metered quality of his honesty. The way he parceled information as if it were currency. He had been unaware, when they were together, of how clearly she saw this. He was aware of it now. "What do you want?" she said. "I saw them," he said, "outside 3 nights ago. The children." The stillness that came over her then was different from the controlled stillness she'd been maintaining. This was the stillness of something more fundamental, more animal. The stillness of a person whose body has registered a threat before the mind has processed it. "Don't," she said. "Elena, don't." The word was low and flat and carried in it the specific authority of a person who has been waiting for something for a long time and has made a complete, irrevocable decision about how she would respond when it arrived. "You don't get to walk back in here and make this about what you saw. You don't get to see them and turn that into a thing you're owed. I'm not saying I'm owed anything. You walked in here, you sat at my table, in my cafe." She leaned forward slightly. "That is an act of someone who believes they're owed something." "I came because I needed to tell you I know about Carver," he said. The stillness broke. It was subtle. Most people wouldn't have noticed it, a slight shift in her breathing, a small tightening around her eyes. But he had spent 4 years reading this face, and he noticed it. "What about Carver?" she said. Not a question. "He was working for the DeSantis family when he told me what he told me about you," Damian said. "He was on their payroll for a year before he came to me with that story. He manufactured it. There was never anything real in what he said about you." He kept his voice level. He kept his hands flat on the table. "I know that now. I should have known it then. I should have asked you instead of..." "Instead of what?" she said. Her voice had changed. It was still quiet, but the quietness had a different quality now. The quiet of something that has been compressed for a long time and is beginning to understand it is no longer compressed. "Instead of calling me that night and telling me you never wanted to hear my voice again? Instead of having your man deliver my things to the sidewalk outside my apartment? Instead of 9 years of nothing, Damian, 9 years of..." She stopped. She put one hand over her mouth briefly, a gesture that was not about crying. Her eyes were dry, her expression was not grief, It was something fiercer than grief. And then she put her hand back on the table. "Don't tell me about Carver," she said. "Don't come here with that." "I'm not here to defend what I did," he said. "Good, because there's no defense." "I know. Stop agreeing with me." "I don't know what else to do," he said, and this was the first thing he'd said that came out with something genuinely uncontrolled in it. And he saw her register it, saw her register that he had not managed to keep it flat, and he watched her decide what to do with that. She decided to ignore it. "The children are mine," she said. "They have been mine every single day for 7 years. I made every decision. I paid every bill. I sat with them through every sickness and every night terror and every first day of school. I am their world, and they are mine, and you don't have a position in that. You left. You don't get to come back and stand in the rain and look at my children and turn that into a claim." "I'm not claiming anything," he said. "I'm sitting here because I needed to see you. I don't have a plan. I came because I couldn't not come. That's the whole of it." She looked at him. The cafe around them had gone very quiet. The two elderly men in the corner were not talking anymore. The young woman behind the counter had found something important to do near the espresso machine that required her complete attention. "Damian," Elena said, and the way she said his name was different from the way she'd been talking, less armored, which frightened him, because he could handle her armored. "I need you to hear me say this clearly, because I'm only going to say it once." She waited until she was certain he was fully present. "Those children do not know you exist. They have never known you exist. I made a decision 9 years ago, after what you did, that they never would, and I have kept that decision every single day, and I am not going to undo it because you stood on a sidewalk in the rain and had a feeling." He held her gaze. "They have my eyes," he said. She flinched. It was small, and she controlled it immediately, but it was there. "That's not relevant." "Elena, that is not relevant to anything I just said," she said, harder now. "Biology is not a relationship. Biology is not 7 years of showing up. Biology does not earn you a seat at this table." She stood up. She was done with the conversation. He could see it, the complete and practiced way she closed a door. "You need to leave, and you need to stay off this street. If you can't do that, I will take the children somewhere you'll never find us, and I have the means and the reason and the complete willingness to do exactly that." He believed her. He stood up. He was taller than her, and in this moment he felt the inverse. She was occupying more space in this room than he was, more authority, more presence. He had walked in here with some half-formed version of what he'd wanted, and it lay in pieces on the table between them, and he didn't try to reassemble it. "I'll go," he said. I'm not going to try to force anything. That's not why I came." "I know why you came," she said. "You came because seeing them broke something open in you, and you needed to be in the same room as me, so you could decide what to do with what broke." She pulled her apron straight. "Figure that out somewhere else." He walked out. Valentina called him 4 times between noon and 2 in the afternoon, which was unusual. Valentina was disciplined about contact. She understood the rules of his life, and she had adapted to them with a thoroughness that he'd appreciated because it required nothing of him. 4 calls in 2 hours was outside the pattern. He called her back at 2:15 from the car, Marcus driving without a destination. "Where are you?" she said. Her voice was different. "Working," he said. "What's wrong?" "I need to see you tonight." "Valentina, it's not a request, Damian." A pause. "I have something you need to see. Something someone sent me this morning." He was quiet. "What kind of something?" "A photograph," she said. "You and a woman. Outside a cafe." Another pause, the kind loaded with everything she wasn't yet saying. "I'm not calling because I'm jealous. I'm calling because whoever sent this to me sent it as a message, and the message isn't about me." He felt the cold that had nothing to do with temperature move through him again. 7 o'clock, he said. "My place." She was already there when he arrived, which meant she'd used the key he'd given her 8 months ago without thinking about the long-term implications of giving it. She was sitting in the chair by the window, his chair, the one he'd sat in the night after he first saw Elena, and she was dressed simply, a dark blouse and trousers, nothing like the careful costuming she usually deployed for their evenings. She looked, for the first time he could remember, like a person rather than a performance. She held out her phone without speaking. He looked at the photograph. It was taken from the street. The angle was across and slightly elevated. Someone in a car, a window seat, with a good camera and enough patience to wait for the right moment. The right moment had been Elena at the cafe window, looking out, and him on the sidewalk, looking in. They were looking directly at each other, lit by the street lamp, framed by the wet dark around them. And the photograph had captured something in both their faces that he could not have articulated, but that was unmistakably real, unmistakably personal. "Who sent this?" he said. "Unknown number," she said. "Miami area code, but those are easy to fake." She watched him. "Who is she?" "Someone from a long time ago." "The cafe is called Marlowe's." "Yes." "She has children," Valentina said. "I looked it up. A boy and a girl. They're 6. She said the last sentence very carefully, the way you say something when you already know what it means, and you're giving the other person the chance to say it first. "Damian." "Don't," he said. "How long have you known?" He set the phone on the windowsill. He took off his coat. He did these things slowly, buying himself nothing with the time except the appearance of steadiness. "A week," he said. She let out a breath that was not quite a laugh and not quite anything else. "A week," she said. "You've known for a week and you've been—" She stopped. She pressed her fingers to her forehead briefly, a gesture he'd never seen her make, too unguarded for the way she usually occupied a room. "Do they know? The children?" "No." "Does she know you know?" "I went to see her this morning." Valentina was quiet for a long time. She looked out the window that he had sat by all night last week, at the city going dark in the early evening below them. "And?" she said. "She made it clear I have no standing," he said. "She's right." When he looked at her sharply, she met his gaze without apology. "She is right. You know she's right. I'm not saying it to be cruel." She stood up from the chair, and the move from sitting to standing changed the quality of the conversation, the way it always did when she decided she was done with whatever position she'd been holding. "But the person who sent me this picture doesn't care about right or wrong, and they don't care about you and me. They sent it to me because they wanted me to show it to you, as a demonstration, as a, here is what we know about you, here is what you haven't been paying attention to." "I know what it is," he said. "Then you know this isn't finished," she said. "Whoever has been watching you knows about the children. And if they know, and they're sending photographs to your mistress instead of making direct contact—" She let the sentence end in the obvious place. He did know. He had known since 2:15 when she'd said the word photograph, and he'd felt the architecture of something much larger begin to reveal itself in the cold at the center of his chest. "You should stay somewhere else tonight," he said. She looked at him. "Are you ending this?" "I'm telling you to be somewhere safe tonight. That's not the same answer." She picked up her bag from the floor beside the chair. "You don't have to end it like this, with logistics. You can just say it." He looked at her across the room. She was a beautiful, intelligent, carefully self-constructed woman who had been beside him for 2 years and had made no demands that he couldn't meet. And he had given her access to his life in the limited, controlled way that he gave anyone access to anything, and she had accepted the terms, and they had worked. What they had worked as was a question he wasn't going to examine right now. "It's not safe," he said. "Whatever this is, it's starting. I don't want you in the radius." She read his face for a long moment. Whatever she was looking for, or whatever she found, made her shoulders settle with a kind of finality. "She's not going to take you back," she said. "The woman in the photograph. Whatever you're thinking about, she's not going to open that door." "I know." "But you're going anyway." He said nothing. She walked to the door and stopped with her hand on the frame, not looking back at him. "Be careful," she said, and the 2 words carried more in them than anything she had said all evening. And then she was gone. Marcus had the car running when Damian came downstairs 20 minutes later. The photograph was sent from the same number that's been linked to 3 shell companies tied to Rowan Steel, Marcus said, before Damian could speak. He said it the way he always delivered the things he'd been preparing while Damian was upstairs. Quietly, without setup, the information simply appearing in the space between them. Rowan Steel. Damian stood on the sidewalk outside his building in the cold and processed the name. Rowan Steel was not a name from the past. Rowan Steel was the specific shape of the present. A man who had been building a consolidation play in the Chicago underworld for 3 years, buying up distressed operations, absorbing independent networks, working with a patience and a method that Damian had been monitoring with professional attention and a calculated lack of alarm. He had not been alarmed because Steele had been careful to stay in Damian's margins, careful not to press against Voss territory directly, and that carefulness had read as intelligence, as the reasonable behavior of a man who understood the landscape. He understood now that it had not been carefulness at all. It had been preparation. "How long has he had eyes on me?" Damian said. "Based on what I can trace? At least 4 months." 4 months. Long enough to know about Elena, long enough to build a file, to understand what the cafe on that street represented, to understand what those children represented. Long enough to understand that the leverage existed before Damian himself had understood it. "He knows about the twins," Damian said. "Almost certainly," Marcus said. Damian got in the car. He sat in the back seat in the cold dark, and he thought about Elena's face across the cafe table that morning. The complete trained authority with which she had told him she would take the children somewhere he could never find them. She had said it like a woman who had prepared this option, who had kept it ready, because she had always understood on some level that his world carried a radius and that the radius did not ask permission before it expanded. She had been right to be afraid. She had been right about everything. "Take me to Greenview," he said. Marcus turned from the front seat. For the first time in a long time, he looked uncertain. "She told you to stay away?" he said. "I know what she told me," Damian said. "Someone with Steele's resources has had 4 months to build a picture of her life. Her address, her routine, the school the children attend. If he moves on that before I can get ahead of it..." "Moving on her place tonight could look like a threat," Marcus said. "If she calls it in..." "She won't call it in," Damian said. "She knows what I am. She knows the difference between a threat and a warning. Drive." Marcus drove. Damian looked out the window at the city moving past and held the folded papers in his inside pocket with 2 fingers. The 3 sheets Marcus had printed, the evidence of what Carver had done and what it had cost. And he understood clearly that he was about to arrive at the home of a woman who had told him this morning that she would disappear before she let him near her children, and that what he was about to tell her would either open the first crack in that decision or close every door between them permanently. He also understood that he had no choice. Because somewhere in this city, Rowan Steele had a photograph of Damian Voss looking at Elena Marlowe through a rain-streaked window with his whole unguarded face, and Steele knew what that photograph meant even better than Damian did. And whatever came next was already in motion, already rolling toward the quiet apartment on Greenview, where 2 6-year-old children with Damian's eyes were asleep, unknowing, unprotected, in the life their mother had built to keep them safe from exactly this. The light in Elena's apartment was on. 2nd floor, front-facing window. The warm yellow of a lamp rather than the blue-white of overhead lighting. The kind of light a person leaves on when they're still awake but trying to wind down, reading maybe, or doing the small domestic accounting of the day's end. Damian stood on the sidewalk across from the building and looked up at it and felt the specific wrongness of what he was about to do, which was arrive at the home of a woman who had told him clearly to stay away at 10:40 in the evening, with information that was going to destroy the careful, constructed safety of everything she'd built. He went up anyway. The building had a buzzer panel. He found her name, E. Marlowe, 2B, her name on a small white card in her own handwriting, practical and unhesitating. And he pressed the button and waited. Silence for 15 seconds. Then her voice, flat and wary through the intercom static. "Who is it?" "Damian." A longer silence, long enough that he thought she was going to leave him on the sidewalk, which was her right, which he had no argument against. Then the door buzzed open. He took the stairs. The hallway was narrow and clean, the kind of building maintained by a landlord who was present without being attentive. The paint slightly scuffed at shoulder height, the overhead light 1 bulb short of adequate. He knocked at 2B and heard her footsteps, the particular rhythm of them, and then the door opened and she was standing there in sweatpants and a worn Northwestern sweatshirt with a mug of something in her hand, and her face had the stripped-down quality of a person encountered outside the hours they've prepared for. She looked at him, then past him, at the empty hallway. "You're alone," she said. "Yes." She stepped back from the door. Not an invitation exactly, more the resigned acknowledgement that whatever was on his face made argument premature. The apartment was small and real. That was the word that came to him, real, in the way that a place is real when someone actually lives in it rather than occupies it. There were drawings on the refrigerator held up with mismatched magnets. There were two small pairs of shoes by the front door, placed with the inexact tidiness of children who have been told repeatedly to put their shoes away and have developed their own interpretation of this instruction. There was a half-finished puzzle on the coffee table, the edge pieces assembled, and a gap in the middle the shape of a sky. The lamp he'd seen from the street was in the corner, casting its warm light over a couch, where a book lay open face down in a way that would crack the spine. He registered all of this in 3 seconds, and it hit him harder than the photograph, harder than the 3 printed sheets in his pocket, harder than almost anything he could remember in recent years, because it was just a life. A real and modest and fully inhabited life, with shoe prints on the mat, and a broken-spined book and small drawings on the refrigerator, and none of it had anything to do with him, and all of it did. "They're asleep," Elena said. She said it as a fact and a boundary simultaneously. "Whatever you have to say it quietly." He told her about the photograph. He told her about Valentina receiving it, about the Miami number, about Marcus's identification of Rowan Steele. He told her all of it standing in her kitchen doorway, his voice low and even, while she stood at the counter with her mug and listened without interrupting, her face doing the thing it did when she was processing something serious, going inward, the surface going still while everything underneath worked. When he finished, she set down her mug. "How long have you known about this Steele person?" she said. "I've been monitoring him for 3 years. I didn't consider him a direct threat until tonight." "You didn't consider him a direct threat," she repeated, "to your operation." "Yes. Because he never moved against your operation directly." She looked at him. "He moved against something else." "Yes." She turned to look at the refrigerator, at the drawings. A long moment passed where the apartment's quiet was very loud. "What does he want?" she said. "My territory, my networks. He's been consolidating for 3 years and I'm the last significant holdout. He can't absorb what I have by force. He doesn't have the manpower or the institutional relationships. So he needs leverage. He needs something I'll trade for." She turned back to him. Her eyes were very clear and very cold. "The children," she said. "I don't know that he'll move that direction," Damian said. "I don't know his timeline or his specific—" "Don't manage what you tell me," she said. "Don't give me the version you've decided I can handle. You came here at 11 o'clock at night because you believe my children are in danger. Say that." He held her gaze. "I believe your children may be in danger." She nodded once, the nod of a woman who has already begun making decisions in the 30 seconds before the conversation catches up to where her mind has gone. "I need to know what you're going to do about it," she said. "I need to move on Steele before he moves on you. But that takes time, and between now and— how much time? Days. Maybe a week." "A week," she said flatly. "I know." "You keep saying that. I know. Like agreeing with me makes you responsible for something." She pushed off from the counter and moved past him into the living room, and he followed because there was nothing else to do. And she sat on the arm of the couch rather than in it, the posture of a person who is not settling in. "I can take them to my cousin's place in Madison. She doesn't know me by my current name. I've been careful about—" She stopped. Something shifted in her expression. "You didn't know about Steele watching you 4 months ago." "No. 4 months. You've been walking this street for how long?" He said nothing. "How long, Damian?" "Years," he said. "On and off. Not intentionally." She looked at him with an expression that was not quite contempt and not quite pity, and contained elements of both. "So he's been watching you walk this street, watching you come back to this neighborhood, and he built a file on why." She pressed her fingers briefly against her eyes, not the gesture of crying, but of someone recalibrating behind closed lids. "He knew about me before you did." The specific cruelty of this fact sat in the room between them. "Elena, you brought this here," she said. Not shouting. Worse than shouting. The flat, exhausted statement of a fact. "I spent 9 years building something that had nothing to do with you. Nothing. And you walked down the street and you looked up at my window and someone with a camera was watching, and now my children—" She stopped herself. She put one hand on her knee and pressed it there. A physical act of self-containment. "Go deal with Steele," she said. "Do what you do, but I'm taking the kids to Madison tomorrow morning, and I'm not giving you the address, and when this is over—" A sound from the hallway. Small footsteps. Irregular, the loose-limbed shuffle of a child half awake. Elena was on her feet immediately, moving toward the hallway, but she was a half-second late, and the boy came around the corner in pajamas with rocket ships on them. His eyes squinted against the lamplight, his dark hair pushed up on one side from the pillow. He stopped when he saw Damian. He was not frightened. He assessed, the way children assess things at night when they find the unexpected, with a serious, slow attention, gathering information before deciding on a response. His eyes moved from Damian to his mother and back to Damian. He had Damian's eyes exactly. In this light, in this apartment, at a distance of 6 feet, there was absolutely nothing ambiguous about it. "Mama," the boy said, his voice rough with sleep. "Who's that?" Elena was beside him immediately, her hand on his shoulder, her body angled in that unconscious way of a parent who puts themselves between their child and the uncertain thing without making the motion obvious. "A friend," she said. "Go back to bed, baby. I'll come tuck you in." The boy looked at Damian for another 3 seconds. Then he looked at his mother's face with the specific attentiveness of a child who is reading a parent rather than listening to them. "Okay," he said, apparently satisfied by something in what he read. He turned and shuffled back down the hall. Elena waited until she heard the bedroom door close. Then she turned to face Damian. He could not speak. He was aware of this as a physical condition. His throat had closed, not with emotion in any melodramatic sense, but with something more fundamental, the way a system shuts down when it's been overloaded. He stood in her living room and breathed. "His name is Noah," Elena said, quietly. She said it like a woman making a choice she'd told herself she would never make, arriving at it in real time, watching his face. "His sister is Maya. They are 6 years old and they are everything I have and they do not know your name." She paused. "And that is the last thing I'm going to give you tonight. Go." He went. He had Marcus drive him around for an hour before he could think clearly. The city moved past the windows, and he sat in the back and said nothing, and Marcus drove without direction, reading the silence correctly, not asking. The boy's face in the lamplight kept returning to him with a precision that was almost physical. The rocket ship pajamas, the serious assessment, the way he'd looked at his mother's face to decide if the situation was safe. A 6-year-old reading his mother's face for threat assessment. The gesture of a child who had been, on some level, paying attention to what safety looked like. Noah. He held the name in his mind and felt what it did to him, which was considerable. By the time he surfaced from this enough to function, it was past midnight and Marcus had looped them back toward the north side without being asked. "I need a meeting with Ortega," Damian said. "Tomorrow morning, early." "I can have him at your office by 7, Marcus said. "Not my office, the Belmont place." Marcus nodded. The Belmont place was a property Damian held through 4 layers of corporate structure that had no registered connection to his name. A floor above a print shop, used for meetings that required a location that didn't appear in any of the organizational records that might theoretically be subject to scrutiny. He had used it twice in the last 3 years. Its existence was known to Marcus, to Ortega, and to no one else. "And pull everything on Steele's physical operation," Damian said. "Where his people are. Where he is. I need to understand the structure before I move on any part of it." "I've been building that since 2 this afternoon," Marcus said. Damian looked at the back of his head. "What else have you been building?" A pause. "Carver's current schedule," Marcus said. "His route to work. When he's alone." "I told you not to go near him." "I'm not near him," Marcus said. "I just know where he is." Damian looked out the window. "Keep it that way." Ortega arrived at this Belmont place at 6:58, which was typical. He was a man who was always 2 minutes early, as if being exactly on time was a kind of lateness he couldn't tolerate. Felix Ortega ran the eastern half of Damian's logistics network, a function that sounded mundane and was the structural spine of everything. He was 55, compact, with gray at his temples and the permanently unhurried manner of a man who had concluded long ago that urgency was for people who hadn't planned correctly. He listened to Damian's account of the Steele situation with his hands folded on the table and his face giving nothing. When Damian finished, he said, "How certain is the Steele connection?" "Certain enough," Damian said. "Certain enough is not certain," Ortega said. "The shell company's trace," Marcus said from his position by the window. "It's 3 layers, but it traces." Ortega looked at Marcus, then back at Damian. What do you want to do? I want to cut his legs out from under him before he can move on the civilian exposure, Damian said. His consolidation depends on the Briggs Street lending operation and the port contacts he picked up from the DeSantis remnants. I want both of those gone within 72 hours. Ortega was quiet for a moment. The port contacts are Mancuso's people, technically. I know whose people they are. Mancuso won't like us moving on his people without a conversation first. Then we have a conversation with Mancuso today, Damian said. You do that, this afternoon. Tell him we have verified intelligence that Steele has been building toward a move against the established network, and that coordinated action is in everyone's interest. He'll listen. He has more to lose from Steele's consolidation than I do. Ortega nodded slowly. And the civilian exposure? Being handled separately, Damian said. Ortega looked at him for a moment. The specific look of a man who has worked alongside someone long enough to know when the statement he's just been given is incomplete. He did not push on it. 72 hours is tight, he said. I know it's tight. I'll make the call to Mancuso by noon, Ortega said. He stood up and buttoned his jacket with the unhurried precision that characterized everything he did. One thing. Say it. Steele didn't build toward this in a vacuum, Ortega said. 3 years of preparation, detailed intelligence on your movements, access to your personal life. He had a source. Someone in the network, or close to it. Someone who's been feeding him. Damian said nothing. You've been thinking about that already, Ortega said. Since last night. Ortega picked up his phone from the table. I'll call you after Mancuso, he said, and left. The door closed. The room was quiet. Marcus remained at the window. Carver, Marcus said. Carver hasn't been in the network for 6 years, Damian said. He's been adjacent, Marcus said. Bridgeview is not far from 2 of Steele's subsidiary operations. I didn't want to speculate until I had more to give you, but the geography it's worth looking at. Damian stood up from the table. He moved to the window beside Marcus and looked out at the street below, the print shop opening for the day, a delivery truck double parked, a woman walking a dog through the early morning gray, the ordinary urban morning, proceeding without awareness of itself. Carver knew about Elena, Damian said. He knew where she was, that she'd come back to the neighborhood. He would have known about the cafe. He would have known... He stopped. The construction that was building in his mind was not new information exactly. It was the assembly of things he'd already held separately into a shape that was considerably worse than its components. He would have known about the children, he said. If he's been watching the neighborhood for any reason, he would have known. Yes, Marcus said, and if he passed that to Steele. Then Steele has known about the children for longer than 4 months, Marcus said, potentially much longer. Damian stood at the window and felt the floor of his assessment shift beneath him, the way the floor of a building shifts when something below it has given way. Not collapse? Not yet, but the preliminary movement that precedes collapse and announces its intention. He had been thinking about this as a problem he could solve in 72 hours. Ortega to Mancuso, the Briggs Street operation dismantled, the port contacts neutralized, Steele's leverage eliminated before he could use it. Clean, sequential, the kind of problem his mind was built for. But if Steele had known about Noah and Maya for longer than 4 months, if Carver had been feeding him since before Damian himself had known they existed, then Steele had not been waiting for an opportunity. He had been waiting for Damian to find out. He had been waiting for exactly the sequence of events that had just occurred. Damian discovering the children, going to Elena, the photograph, Valentina, the whole accelerating cascade. Because a man who is frightened is easier to maneuver than a man who is calm, and Damian had just spent a week being precisely as frightened as Steele needed him to be. His phone rang. He looked at the screen. Unknown number. He answered it. Mr. Voss. The voice was even, educated, with a faint accent he couldn't immediately place. Not local, not Midwest. My name is Rowan Steele. I apologize for the early hour. The room went completely still. Marcus turned from the window. Damian kept his voice flat. How did you get this number? I've had this number for some time, Steele said. I've been waiting for the appropriate moment to use it. I think we've arrived. A pause. I'd like to propose a meeting. Today? If that works for you. There are things we should discuss before either of us makes a decision that creates outcomes neither of us wants. And if I decline the meeting, Damian said, then I'll need to move forward on my current timeline without your input, Steele said, which would be unfortunate. My current timeline involves several actions that would be difficult to reverse once initiated. Another pause. And what came into the pause was not a threat in the crude sense. It was something quieter and more precise. The implication of a man who does not need to shout because he already holds everything he needs. I understand you've recently become aware of some family connections you weren't previously in a position to consider. I'd rather discuss those connections in a setting that allows for rational conversation than allow the situation to develop in a less structured direction. Damian looked at Marcus across the room. Marcus had gone very still, reading Damian's face. Where? Damian said. I'll send an address, Steele said. 2 o'clock. Come alone. The call ended. Damian lowered the phone. The room held its silence for 3 full seconds. Don't say it, Damian said. You're not going alone, Marcus said. I know I'm not going alone. Walking into a location he chooses on his timeline. I know what it is, Damian said. I'm going. Because he has 4 months on me and a source inside my history, and he just called me on a number that is not supposed to exist, Damian said. And for the first time that morning, his voice lost its flatness, the control slipping just enough to reveal what was underneath it, which was not anger exactly, but something older and more physical than anger. He called me on this number to show me he can. He's not going to move on the children before the meeting because they're more useful to him as a threat than as an action. I have until 2 o'clock to put something in place, and then I'm going to sit across from him and find out what he actually wants, because right now I'm operating on incomplete information, and in my experience, the most dangerous place to be is making decisions without the full picture. Marcus held his gaze. All right, he said. Get Elena somewhere safe, Damian said. Now, before 2. Don't tell her I sent you. She won't go if she knows it's me. Tell her... He stopped. He thought about what would make Elena Marlowe move her children from their home at 8 in the morning without knowing the full reason. He thought about what she would respond to. Tell her there's been a credible threat identified against families in the neighborhood connected to organized crime activity. Tell her it's precautionary. Tell her you're with the city. Marcus raised an eyebrow. She'll verify, Damian said. She's thorough. Have something she can verify against. A name, a badge number, something real enough to hold for 24 hours. And when she finds out, she'll be safe, Damian said. She can be angry from safe. The address Steele sent was a restaurant in the West Loop, closed for lunch service on Tuesdays, which meant it had been arranged in advance, which meant the meeting itself had been arranged in advance, which meant the phone call had not been a spontaneous decision, but a prepared move, timed and deliberate. Damian walked in at 2 o'clock. The restaurant was dim, the chairs still up on most of the tables, the smell of last night's service hanging in the air. One table in the center of the room had been set. Not elaborately, just 2 chairs, 2 glasses of water, the bare minimum of a meeting between people who are not pretending this is social. Rowan Steele was already seated. I was younger than Damian had expected. Early 40s, with the lean, maintained look of a man who exercised with discipline and slept adequately and had no particular vices that cost him physically. He was dressed without ostentation, a dark jacket, open collar, nothing that announced itself. He looked, at first assessment, like a financial consultant, like a man who solved problems in rooms with whiteboards. This was, Damian understood, entirely intentional. Mr. Voss, Steele said, and gestured to the other chair. Thank you for coming. Damian sat. He did not look around the room for Steele's people because he already knew they were there, 2 at the bar and back, 1 near the kitchen door, positioned without being theatrical about it. He had 2 of his own outside. Marcus was in a car on the cross street. The pieces were on the table and everyone understood the count. You went to a lot of trouble, Damian said. Some, Steele agreed, though I'd argue the trouble was front-loaded. The last 4 months have been relatively straightforward. Because Carver gave you the work. Something moved in Steele's expression. Not surprise, but the slight recalibration of a man who had underestimated the speed of an opposing mind. Daniel Carver is a professional, he said. He provided historical context that was useful. He's a man who sold the same person twice, Damian said. First to the DeSantis family, then to you. Whatever he told you, build in a discount. Noted, Steele said, without any indication that he found this concerning, which meant either Carver's information had already been verified through other channels, or Steele was better at composure than most. Damian did not know yet which. "Can I be direct?" Steele said. "You've been building to something for 3 years," Damian said. "Be as direct as you like." Steele folded his hands on the table. He had the hands of someone who did not do physical work. Not soft, exactly, but unmarked, the hands of a man whose violence was always intermediated. "I want the North and West distribution networks," he said. "The port relationships, the lending infrastructure on the South Side, and the municipal contacts you've cultivated over the last decade. In exchange, I will leave your personal operations intact. I will ensure that certain documentary evidence that has been compiled does not reach federal channels, and I will guarantee the safety of Elena Marlowe and her children permanently and completely." The room was very quiet. "You've been collecting federal evidence against me," Damian said. "For 18 months, Steele said. "Enough to support a significant prosecution. I'm not interested in using it. It's an insurance instrument, nothing more. I'm a businessman, not a prosecutor." "And the children are also an insurance instrument." Steele's expression did not change. "The children are simply people I'm aware of," he said. "Their safety is entirely contingent on the cooperative relationship between you and me. I want to be completely clear about that without making it sound like something it isn't." Damian looked at him. He looked at the composed face across the table, the folded hands, the glass of water Steele had not touched. He looked at the man who had spent 3 years building a mechanism designed to leave Damian with nothing to say no to. "You're asking me to hand you my entire operation," Damian said. "I'm asking you to transition it," Steele said. "Over 90 days, structured, with your involvement in a consultative capacity during the handover period. After which you are free. The federal material is destroyed. The family in Greenview is simply a woman who runs a cafe. No one touches them, now or ever. You have my word on that." "Your word," Damian said. "I understand that carries limited weight in an initial meeting," Steele said, "which is why I'm prepared to put structural guarantees in place that—" "What guarantees the federal material actually gets destroyed?" Damian said. "What guarantees the family stays safe after I've handed you everything and I have no more leverage? What guarantees that in 90 days you don't simply have everything you want and I'm standing in an empty room?" Steele paused. Not long. Just long enough to reveal that these were the questions he'd expected and had prepared for, but was deciding how to deploy the answers. "Trust is built incrementally," he said. "That's what the 90 days is for." Damian said nothing. "I want to be honest with you," Steele said, leaning forward slightly. "You are a capable and well-organized man who has run a significant operation for a long time. I respect that. I have no interest in destroying you. I have an interest in acquiring what you've built." "Those are different things." "They're the same thing," Damian said. "What I've built is not separable from me. You take it, and I'm a man with nothing." "You're a man with a family," Steele said, simply, plainly, without theater. "Depending on how you look at it, that's not nothing." Damian sat with this. Then his phone vibrated in his pocket. He pulled it out and looked at the screen under the table. Marcus. One word, problem. He stood up. Steele looked at him. "I'll need 24 hours, Damian said. "You have until tomorrow noon," Steele said. "After that, the timeline advances whether we've concluded our conversation or not." Damian walked out. He was on the phone before he reached the door, Marcus picking up on the first ring. "Talk," Damian said. "The woman from Marlowe's called," Marcus said. His voice was different, tighter, stripped of its characteristic evenness. "The young one who works the counter. She tried to reach Elena and couldn't. Then she called the emergency contact Elena left with the cafe, which was this number." Damian pushed through the restaurant door onto the street, the cold air hitting his face. "Why?" "The children's school called the cafe," Marcus said. "Noah and Maya didn't arrive this morning. Elena was supposed to walk them to school at 8:15. She never showed. School called the cafe at 9:30 when they realized." Damian stopped on the sidewalk. "Marcus," he said. His voice was very quiet. "I sent someone to the apartment at 10, Marcus said. The door was unlocked. Shoes by the door. Coffee still on. Her phone on the kitchen counter." A pause. "Damian, she didn't leave voluntarily." He stood on the sidewalk outside the restaurant where Rowan Steele was still sitting with his folded hands and his glass of untouched water, And he understood with the totality of a man who has just seen the board completely for the first time that the meeting had not been a negotiation. It had been a distraction. The 90-day transition, the federal evidence, the word and the guarantees, all of it designed to put him in a chair at a table in a dim restaurant from 2 until whenever, occupied, his attention on the man across from him. While somewhere in the city, Elena and 2 6-year-old children with rocket ships on their pajamas were taken from an apartment where a coffee maker was still running and a book lay open on the couch with its spine going slowly and irreversibly to ruin. He turned around and walked back into the restaurant. Steele looked up. Damian stood at the table and looked at him, and did not raise his voice, and did not reach for anything, and did not perform any of the violence that was moving through him like current through a wire. "Where are they?" he said. Steele's expression shifted for the first time, something in it becoming very careful, very still, the composure of a man recalibrating. "I don't know what you have until I finish walking to my car," Damian said, "to tell me where they are. After that, every guarantee I might have been willing to consider is off the table, and everything I've spent 30 years building gets pointed in one direction, and that direction is you, and I want you to understand that I am not talking about negotiation anymore." He turned and walked toward the door. He was 7 steps from the table when Steele spoke. "Damian." He stopped. "She's safe," Steele said. "They're all safe." This was a demonstration, a proof of capability. "I needed you to understand that the conversation we were having was real." A pause. "Sit down. Let's finish this." Damian stood with his back to the room and his hand on the doorframe and his whole life arranged behind him in the configuration it had just taken, which was nothing like the configuration it had been in this morning, or yesterday, or for the 30 years before that. He thought about Noah's face in the lamplight, the rocket ships, the way the boy had looked at his mother's face to decide if the world was safe. He thought about what it meant that he was the reason the world was not. He took his hand off the doorframe, and he turned around. He sat back down, not because Steele had asked him to, not because the voice behind him had carried any authority he was obligated to recognize. He sat back down because the alternative was walking out a door into a city where Elena and 2 children were somewhere he didn't know, held by people he hadn't yet identified, and walking out accomplished nothing except the performance of a rage he couldn't afford to perform right now. He sat down and he put his hands on the table and he looked at Rowan Steele. "Where are they?" he said. "Safe. I told you. I don't want the adjective, I want the address." Steele looked at him with the measured attention of a man recalibrating risk in real time, deciding how much to show, how much to hold. "That's not how this works," he said. "The address is what you get when we conclude an agreement, not before." "Then we're not concluding anything," Damian said, "because I'm not signing over 30 years of my life on the word of a man who just had a woman and 2 children taken from their home while I was sitting at his table." "That's exactly what you're going to do," Steele said, and for the first time the composure cracked slightly at the surface, not into anger but into something more honest. The impatience of a man who has run a long, careful operation and is tired of the final obstacle, refusing to fall cleanly. "You don't have a position here, Damian. You came here thinking you could read the room and find an angle and walk out with something. There's no angle. There's an agreement or there's a consequence. Those are the only 2 things on the table." Damian looked at him. He looked at him for a long time, the way he looked at things when he was actually seeing them rather than performing attention. And what he saw was a man who was right about the tactical situation and wrong about something more fundamental. Wrong about what Damian was willing to lose. Wrong about how a man makes calculations when the thing on the table is no longer property or money or institutional power. "Give me a phone call," Damian said. "One call to confirm they're unharmed. I hear Elena's voice and the children's voices and they tell me they're not hurt. You do that and we continue the conversation." Steele considered this. Then he nodded once and took out his own phone and made a call and handed the phone across the table. 3 rings. "Hello?" Elena's voice. Flat, controlled, the voice of a woman who was frightened and was managing it with everything she had. "It's me," Damian said. "Are you hurt?" "No." A pause. "The children are with me. They're—" Her voice dropped slightly. "They think it's an adventure. I told them we're visiting friends." The thing that moved through him at this was not describable in terms he had available. He filed it away. Are you in one location or don't? Steele said across the table. Damian ignored him. Tap the phone twice if you're being held at a single location. 2 taps. Good, he said. I'm going to get you out. Do you understand me? A silence. Then very quietly, in a voice he recognized as the one she used when she was being completely honest and hated being completely honest. I know. Steele took the phone back. They looked at each other. The agreement, Steele said. I'll have my attorney draw up. My attorney will draw it up, Steele said. You'll sign today. We'll do the first transfer of operational documentation within 48 hours and release the family upon confirmation. Release upon confirmation means I sign before they're free, Damian said. That's not an agreement, that's a surrender. Yes, Steele said, simply. It is. Damian sat with this. And while he sat with it, while Steele watched him with the patient confidence of a man who had arranged the room to contain exactly one exit, Damian was doing something Steele could not see. He was thinking about Marcus, who was in a car on the cross street with 2 of his best people and 14 years of experience reading Damian's silences. And he was thinking about what Marcus had been doing for the 6 hours since they discovered Elena's apartment empty. And he was thinking about the fact that Marcus had not called again since that first call, which meant either Marcus had found nothing or Marcus had found something and was holding it until the right moment, and he was betting everything he had left to bet on the second option. He took out his own phone. I need to call my attorney, he said, to begin the documentation process. Steele nodded. Keep it brief. Damian called Marcus. Working on it, Marcus said before Damian could speak. 2 words. Working on it. 20 minutes. Understood, Damian said. Start with the Northwest portfolio documentation. Everything through the Calumet Holdings structure. He said this for Steele's benefit, the sound of a man beginning the process of compliance, and he watched Steele's shoulders settle fractionally with something that was not quite relief but was adjacent to it. He ended the call and set his phone on the table. 20 minutes, he said to Steele, for the preliminary documentation. I have time, Steele said. Well, it was 17 minutes. Marcus came through the restaurant door with the particular quality of controlled urgency that was the fastest Damian had ever seen him move, and he crossed the floor and leaned down and said very quietly into Damian's ear 4 words. Carver gave us the location. Damian did not move his face. He did not move anything. He sat at the table with his hands flat and his expression exactly as it had been for the last 17 minutes. And he said, at normal conversational volume, "Give me a moment." He stood and looked at Steele. I need 5 minutes with my counsel. Steele looked at Marcus, read him with the professional attention of someone who understood that the quality of movement in a room communicated things. His expression shifted. We're past the point of 5 minutes, Damian said. If you're confident in your position, 5 minutes costs you nothing. A beat. 4, Steele said. Damian walked to the far end of the restaurant with Marcus, and they stood with their backs to the room, and Damian said nothing out loud. Marcus put his phone in Damian's hand, screen up, a photograph on it. A building. Single-story, industrial, the kind of anonymous structure that exists in the middle distance zones of any large city where zoning is loose and no one is looking closely. A street sign at the corner of the frame. Damian memorized the cross streets and handed the phone back. Carver came to you, Damian said under his breath. Showed up at the building on Belmont 40 minutes ago, Marcus said, the words barely moving his lips. Said Steele used him and cut him loose after the meeting was set up. Sighed he didn't know about the woman and the kids being taken. Says Steele moved on that without telling him, and he wants out from whatever this becomes. You believe him? He was scared, Marcus said. Real scared, not performed. He gave me the location clean, no conditions, before I asked him for anything. Damian looked at the wall in front of him. How many people at the location? He said 3, plus a handler who's in and out. Our people are moving? Reyes and Castillo are 4 blocks out waiting on your word, Marcus said. They go in quiet, no noise, extract the woman and children out the back before Steele knows anything's moved. If Steele has a contact at the location who calls him the moment someone approaches, then we have a problem, Marcus said. But Carver says the people holding them don't know who they're holding or why. They're hired exterior. They haven't been told the value of the situation. Damian thought about this for exactly 3 seconds, which was all the time he had. "Send Reyes," he said. "Now, right now, while I'm still in this room. I need Steele looking at me when they go in." Marcus was already moving the phone to his ear as he turned back toward the door. Damian walked back to the table. He sat down. He put his hands back on the table. He looked at Rowan Steele, who was watching him with the recalibrated attention of a man who had read something in the last 4 minutes that he was still processing, not certain yet whether it was significant. "The documentation is being prepared," Damian said. "Good," Steele said. "Walk me through the federal material," Damian said. "I want to understand what you have, specifically. Before I commit to anything, I want the full picture." "That's not a request I'm going to honor," Steele said. "Then we're at an impasse." "We're not at an impasse," Steele said, and the patience in his voice was thinning now, the coating wearing off to reveal the metal underneath. "You are a man who has run out of options pretending he hasn't. I've been at this table with men in your position before. I know exactly what the delay is for. And I'm telling you, whatever you think is happening outside this room right now, it isn't going to change the fundamental structure of what we're doing here." Damian looked at him. "You're probably right," he said. "Then stop." Steele's phone buzzed on the table. He looked at it. A flash of something moved across his face. Controlled but real, the first genuine reaction Damian had seen from him. A slight tightening around the eyes, a fractional hardening of the jaw. He picked up the phone and looked at the screen, and Damian watched him read whatever was there, and watched the composure do what composure does under sufficient pressure, which is not break but bend, visibly, in the direction of the weight. He set the phone down. "It appears," Steele said very carefully, "that the situation has developed." "Has it?" Damian said. The 2 men at the bar had their hands moving toward the inside of their jackets. Damian felt rather than saw this, the peripheral awareness of a man who had spent 30 years in rooms where the location of hands mattered. "Easy," Damian said, not looking at the bar. He said it to the room generally, flatly, the word carrying the specific authority of a man who understands that the situation has just changed and is not afraid of the new situation. Nobody needs to do anything. Steele looked at him. The composure was back, mostly, but the architecture of the meeting had shifted in a way that both of them could feel. "You moved on my people," he said. "I moved the family to somewhere safe," Damian said. "That's all. No one's been hurt. No one's going to be hurt. I'm still here." "You're still here," Steele said, "without leverage." "I have the same leverage I had 30 years ago," Damian said, "which is 30 years of accumulated knowledge about how this city works, who it owes, and who owes it. You want my operation. You've spent 3 years building toward acquiring it. Taking the children was supposed to make me compliant, and I understand the logic of that. But you don't actually want to harm them. Harming a woman and 2 children produces a set of consequences that nobody in this business wants to manage. And you know that better than I do because you're careful, and careful people don't create those kinds of loose ends." Steele was quiet. "So we're back to a negotiation," Damian said, "which is what I was willing to have from the beginning. Sit down and let's talk about what a real transition actually looks like." Steele looked at him for a long time. Then he sat. What happened in the next 4 hours was not a clean victory. Damian had never expected a clean victory. Clean victories were for men who didn't understand the game they were playing, who believed that the right move at the right moment produced an uncomplicated outcome. What 4 hours of hard, grinding negotiation in a restaurant that smelled like last night's garlic and this morning's fear produced was something more durable and considerably more expensive. He gave Steele the Southside lending infrastructure. All of it. The books, the contacts, the collectors, the legal architecture underneath. He gave him 2 of the 3 port relationships, retaining the third because the third was the one that touched things he was not prepared to hand to anyone. He gave him access to 6 of the 12 municipal contacts, the ones he'd built through money rather than through the longer, harder process of genuine relationship, because those were replaceable in a way the others were not. In exchange, the federal documentation was to be transferred to a neutral attorney and held in escrow under conditions that Damian's counsel would verify, with destruction contingent on the completion of the transition in good faith. The family in Greenview was to be formally and structurally removed from any calculation, a term Steele's attorney put in writing that Steele signed, which was worth what signed documents were worth in their world, which was not everything but was something. And Damian was to retain the North and West distribution networks, the institutional relationships that were the actual foundation of his operation, and his position in the city. Diminished? Yes. Constrained? Yes, but present. Not a victory. A survival. He walked out of the restaurant at 6:45 in the evening, and the cold hit him like something he'd forgotten was there, and he stood on the sidewalk for a moment and breathed. Just breathed. The way you breathe when you've been holding something for hours, and the holding is over. Marcus pulled up in 30 seconds. "Elena?" Damian said, getting in. "Reyes took them to the Evanston property," Marcus said. "All three. No injuries. The kids thought they were going on a drive." He paused. "Elena knows." "Knows what?" "That you sent Reyes. That the location came from Carver. That you were in the restaurant keeping Steele occupied while the extraction happened." He glanced in the rearview mirror. "She's been asking for you since about 4 o'clock. "Take me there," Damian said. "Bochem." The Evanston property was a house he'd owned for 11 years through a trust that had never been administratively connected to anything operational. A clean asset, the kind you kept clean specifically for contingencies you hoped would never arise. It was a real house, not a safe house in the tactical sense, with a kitchen and a backyard and a second floor with 3 bedrooms. And when Damian arrived at 8 in the evening, there were lights on in every room. Reyes met him at the door. "Kids are in the back room," he said. "They've eaten. The girl fell asleep about an hour ago. The boy's been trying to stay awake." Damian nodded. "Where's Elena?" "Kitchen." He found her at the kitchen table with a mug of something she wasn't drinking, her hands wrapped around it for the warmth rather than the contents. She looked up when he came in. She had the specific look of a person who has been frightened for hours and is now on the other side of the fear, not relieved exactly but emptied, the adrenaline gone and the residue of it sitting in every line of her body. He sat down across from her without being asked. She looked at him. "Carver," she said. "Yes." "The man who told you I betrayed you?" "Yes." She looked down at her mug. "He's the one who gave Marcus the location." "He came forward on his own," Damian said. "Steele used him and cut him loose. He says he didn't know about you being taken." "Do you believe him?" "I believe he was scared enough to be useful," Damian said. "Whether he's telling the truth about what he knew? I don't know. I'm not sure it matters right now." Elena was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Noah woke up twice in the car asking where we were going. I told him we were visiting a friend of mine. He looked at me the same way he looked at you the other night." She paused. "Like he was deciding whether to believe me." Damian said nothing. "He's been doing that since he could talk," she said. "Reading faces. Reading rooms. I thought it was just him, just his personality. But it's yours. It's exactly the way you look at a room when you walk into it." She said this without accusation, more like a woman who has been carrying a piece of knowledge for a long time and has decided to set it down. "He's going to have a harder time than Maya," she said. "Maya just runs at everything. But Noah, he's going to want to understand everything before he trusts it, and that's going to be hard for him." "He sounds like someone I know," Damian said. She looked at him. The look had something in it that wasn't softness exactly. She was too tired and too honest for softness right now, but was the thing that lives in the same neighborhood. "What did you give Steele?" she said. He told her. He told her the whole of it, the lending infrastructure and the port contacts and the municipal access and what he'd retained, and she listened the way she'd listened to him in the restaurant this morning, going interior, processing without interruption. When he finished, she said, "You gave away half of what you spent 30 years building, more or less, to get us back. To get you back safely," he said. "The negotiation was going to happen regardless. The situation was already—" "Damian," she said, "don't manage it. Don't tell me the version that makes it strategic." He stopped. "Did you give it up for us?" she said. He looked at her across the kitchen table of a house he'd kept clean for a contingency that turned out to be this, and he said, "Yes." She absorbed this. She turned her mug 1/4 rotation on the table, the same small clockwise motion he'd made with his coffee cup a week ago in his own kitchen. And he recognized the gesture, and the recognition hit him somewhere that had been braced for a long time and was tired of bracing. "I need you to understand something," she said. "What happened today? Having my children taken? Being held in a room, not knowing what was happening to you or to them or to any of it. I need you to understand that this is what I was afraid of. Not abstractly. This, specifically, this exact situation. I have been afraid of this situation for 7 years since they were born, and I built everything I built specifically to prevent it from ever being real. I know, he said. And you walked down my street, she said, and someone was watching. Yes. And now here we are. Yes. The kitchen was very quiet. Somewhere in the back of the house, down the hall, in one of the bedrooms, a child shifted in sleep, the soft sound of it reaching them through the walls. What happens now? Elena said. With Steele. Is it over? The immediate threat is contained, Damian said. The agreement holds for now. Steele is a careful man. He's not going to violate a signed arrangement when he's gotten most of what he wanted. The risk level drops significantly. Significantly, she said. Not completely. Not completely, he said. I can't tell you completely. I don't have that to offer. She looked at him, and he looked back at her. And the years sat between them on the kitchen table like something physical, like the objects of an estate being gone through, some of it salvageable, and some of it past saving and the sorting not yet done. I want to see them, he said. I'm not asking for anything beyond that. I'm not asking you to decide anything tonight or make any promises. I just want to see them, and then I'll let you sleep, and tomorrow you can tell me whatever you've decided. Elena was quiet for a long moment. Then she stood up and walked to the hallway, and Damian followed her, and she opened the door to the back bedroom where the light was still on low, and Maya was asleep on her side with one arm stretched out toward the empty space beside her, and Noah was on his back with his eyes half open in the way of a child who has been trying to stay awake and is losing the fight by inches. Noah looked at Damian. He looked at him with those serious, watchful, heavy-lidded eyes that Damian had first seen on a rainy street 2 weeks ago from across the distance of 9 lost years. And this time the distance was the length of a small room, and there was lamplight instead of a street lamp, and the boy looked at him the same way he'd looked at his mother's face in the apartment. Not afraid, not reaching, just reading. "Hi," the boy said. His voice was thick with sleep. Damian stood in the doorway. His throat had done the thing it did. He managed, very quietly, "Hi." Noah looked at him for another 3 seconds. Then his eyes closed, the weight of the day finally pulling him under, and his breathing changed into the slow and total unconsciousness of a child who has decided, on whatever evidence was available to him, that the room is safe. Elena put her hand on the doorframe beside Damian's arm. Not touching him, just there. He stood in the doorway and watched his son sleep and understood, with the full and irreversible clarity of a thing that can never be understood halfway, what he had been walking away from for 9 years on streets. He told himself he wandered down by accident, and what it was going to cost him now to walk toward it, and that the cost was everything he'd been, and that he was going to pay it. He was still standing there when Elena said, very quietly, beside him, "He never sleeps that fast with strangers." And Damian, for the first time in 30 years of building a life that was supposed to require nothing from anyone, had no answer for that, because there was no answer for it, because it was the kind of thing that doesn't ask for an answer, only for the willingness to stand still inside it and let it be what it is. He stood still. The hallway was quiet around them, and the house held its breath, and outside the windows Chicago continued its indifferent roar, and somewhere in the structure of the night, the last of the empire he'd spent his whole life building was already beginning its long, necessary dissolution, and the man standing in a doorway watching a sleeping boy did not mourn it, not one piece of it, not even slightly, which was the most honest thing that had happened to Damian Voss in longer than he could remember. He slept in the car. Marcus had pulled the sedan to the curb outside the Evanston house at some point after midnight, cut the engine, and stayed. When Damian came out at 6:15 in the morning, Marcus was upright in the driver's seat with his eyes open and a thermos of coffee that had gone cold, because Marcus did not sleep when the situation was unresolved, and he did not consider the situation resolved. Damian got in the passenger seat, which he almost never did. Marcus looked at this small deviation from pattern and said nothing. "Steele's attorney is going to want to move on the first documentation transfer today," Damian said. "I need Ortega at the office by 9, real office. Don't hide it." "You sure about that?" Marcus said. "Coming out in the open while the transition is the cover," Damian said. "Steele wants clean. He's not going to move against anything while he's taking receipt of what I'm handing him. That's the window. He took the cold thermos from Marcus and drank from it anyway, the cold coffee sitting flat and bitter on an empty stomach. I need to deal with Carver. Marcus was quiet. Not the way you're thinking, Damian said. I'm not thinking anything. Yes, you are. Damian held the thermos in both hands, looking at the house through the windshield. The second floor light had come on. Elena's room, or one of the children's, someone up early. I need to talk to him, that's all. That's all, Marcus said, and the two words carried the entire weight of 14 years of knowing what Damian Voss meant when he said something was going to be simple. That's all, Damian said. Daniel Carver lived in a ground-floor apartment in Bridgeview that smelled like cigarettes and microwaved food, and the specific staleness of a space occupied by a man who had stopped expecting anything particular from his days. He answered the door in a gray undershirt and jeans, unshaved, and when he saw Damian standing on his doorstep at 7:45 in the morning with Marcus at the curb behind him, the blood left his face in a way that was so complete and so immediate that for a moment he looked like a different man entirely, hollowed, older, the architecture of his face suddenly visible under the skin. Damian, he said. The word came out as barely anything. Can I come in? Damian said. It wasn't a question. Carver stepped back anyway. The apartment was what it smelled like. A couch with the cushions gone concave from use. A kitchen visible through a doorway with dishes in the sink, and a coffee maker with the carafe sitting empty on the warmer, the element still on, burning nothing. A television on low with the sound muted. Some morning news program running its silent loop of the world's ongoing problems. Carver lived here alone and had for a while, and it showed in the way that a man's solitude shows when he stopped trying to conceal it from himself. Damian sat in the single chair across from the couch. Carver sat on the couch. Neither of them looked at the television. You went to Marcus, Damian said. Yes. Carver's voice had steadied slightly. He was a man who had spent enough years in difficult rooms that the initial shock of this one was giving way to something more operational. The survival mechanism of a person who knows how to function under pressure, even when the pressure is specifically about his own survival. I didn't know about the woman and the kids. I want you to know that. I know, Damian said. Carver looked at him. Uncertainty in the look, not trusting the easy agreement, reading it for what it might conceal. What did you know? Damian said. Steele wanted the photograph taken, wanted it sent to your woman, the Moretti one. He wanted you destabilized. He knew about Elena from what I told him about the neighborhood, about your pattern of coming back there. I didn't... He stopped. He pressed his hands together between his knees, a gesture Damian recognized from 20 years of knowing him, the gesture he made when he was deciding how honest to be. I told him you came back to that street. I told him there was a woman there from before. I didn't know about the children. When I found out what he'd done, moving on them directly, I wasn't... He stopped again. Say it, Damian said. I wasn't prepared for that, Carver said. I know what I did. I know the list of what I did going back a long way. But not children. I didn't agree to that. Damian looked at him for a long time. He looked at the man who had been beside him since they were 22 years old, breaking into apartments on the west side. The man who had sat in more rooms with him than anyone else alive. The man who had watched him build everything and had spent years simultaneously feeding pieces of it to people who wanted to dismantle it. He looked at what remained of that man in this apartment. Smaller somehow, not physically, but in the way a person gets smaller when the life they built their identity on has contracted to a ground-floor apartment in Bridgeview with an empty coffee carafe burning on the element. Why did you go to the DeSantis family? Damian said. Not why did you betray me? Why did you go to them? Asking for the actual reason rather than the moral category of the act. Carver was quiet for a long moment. They came to me, he said. 2011. Offered me a structure that felt like what I'd built with you was temporary. Like you were going to consolidate so far that I'd eventually be on the outside of my own operation. He paused. I was wrong about that. I know that now. But I was scared and stupid is the same thing in this business. And Elena, Damian said. Carver looked at the floor. Say it, Damian said again, while we're here. I knew she wasn't feeding anything to the DeSantis people, Carver said. I knew that when I told you she was. He said it to the floor. Then he looked up. You were going to lose her anyway. She was already... You could see it. She was already stepping back from you, from what you were. I knew if she left you on her own terms, it was going to... He stopped. It was going to what? Damian said. Destabilize you, Carver said, and the word landed between them with the full weight of its honesty. You were at your most unpredictable when you were in pain. I'd watched it. I needed you stable and operational, and the DeSantis people needed you separated from someone they couldn't get to, and Elena was... He stopped himself. She was the solution to two problems. The room held this. Damian sat with it, not performing composure this time, actually sitting with it, actually letting it exist fully in his awareness, the complete picture of what had been done and why and what it had cost. A woman who had not betrayed him. Two children who had grown 6 years in a world that had never contained his name. A man sitting across from him who had made a calculation about his emotional stability and acted on it, and been wrong about the calculation in ways that had reordered everything. He thought about what he had come here to do. He had told Marcus it wasn't the thing Marcus was thinking, and that was true. And also the truth was more complicated than either of them had said out loud in the car. I'm not going to hurt you, Damian said. I want you to hear me say that clearly. Carver looked at him. Not today. Not later. Not through someone else. Damian stood up. We're done. What you were to me is finished, and what I was to you is finished, and we don't exist in the same world anymore. That's what I came to tell you. Carver was still looking at him with the expression of a man receiving news he cannot fully process. Relief, and something underneath the relief that was harder to look at. The specific grief of a person who understands that the thing they've been cut loose from was the central structure of their life and they destroyed it themselves. The woman, Carver said. Elena. Is she... She's fine, Damian said. The children are fine. He walked to the door. His hand was on the frame when Carver said, behind him, very quietly, I'm sorry, Damian. He stood in the doorway for a moment. The morning light was coming in from the street, cold and gray and even, the light of a day that didn't know or care about the weight of what it was illuminating. I know, Damian said. And he left. The documentation transfer took 11 days. Ortega managed it with the methodical, unhurried precision that characterized everything he did, working through Steele's attorneys with the patience of a man who understood that the speed of a transaction communicated as much as its terms. Damian was present for the primary sessions and absent from the subsidiary ones, which was itself a communication. Here is what I am still responsible for. Here is what I have already released. He moved through those 11 days in a state he didn't have a name for. Not grief, not relief. Something more structural than either. The feeling of a load-bearing wall coming down in a building you've lived in so long, you'd forgotten it was a wall, and the building staying up anyway, and the space where the wall had been turning out to be something you could breathe in. He called Elena on the third day. She answered on the second ring, which he chose not to interpret but couldn't entirely help himself from noticing. The transfer is moving, he said. Steele's people are satisfied with the pace. The risk level is... I know, she said. Ortega called me. As a courtesy. He paused. Ortega called you. He said you asked him to keep me updated independently. A pause from her end. Did you? Yes, he said. Another pause. The kids are back in school, she said. Maya had a meltdown on the first morning back because she'd missed a classmate's birthday party while we were away, and I had to have a 20-minute conversation about why some things can't be planned for. A beat. Noah just went back in without saying anything, unpacked his bag and went to his desk. That sounds right, Damian said. It does, Elena said, and he heard in those two words the thing she was not yet saying, the thing that was present but not ready, the way a tree is present in a seed but requires conditions and time that cannot be rushed. They spoke for 11 minutes, mostly logistics, the edges of it something else. He went to the cafe on a Saturday morning, 3 weeks after the Evanston house, and he sat at the same table by the window where he'd sat when he first came in. He ordered coffee from the young woman with the flower on her forearm, who looked at him with the wariness of someone who remembered the last time he'd come in and what had followed. He drank the coffee and read nothing and watched the street outside and waited. Elena came out of the kitchen at 9:40, and she saw him immediately. and she stood in the doorway to the kitchen for a moment. And then she walked to his table and sat down across from him without being asked, the way she'd done 3 weeks ago, but with something different in the quality of it. Less the resigned acknowledgement of inevitability and more the conscious choice of a woman who has made her decision and is sitting down inside it. "You've been coming every Saturday," she said. "Yes." "You've been sitting in the same spot." "I like the light," he said. She looked at him. The look had something in it that was close to a smile and stopped just short. The expression of a woman who finds something genuinely funny and is not yet in a place where she wants to give that away. "You've never cared about light in your entire life," she said. "I'm branching out," he said. She looked at the table. Then she looked at him. "I told Noah about you," she said. "Last week. Not everything. He's 6. But I told him that his father existed, that his father's name was Damian, and that his father would like to meet him if Noah wanted that." His hands were flat on the table and he kept them there. "What did he say?" Damian said. "He was quiet for a long time," Elena said. "Then he asked why you hadn't been around before. And I told him that was a complicated question that had a long answer, and that I would tell him more when he was older, and that right now the important thing was that you were here now if he wanted you to be." She paused. He said, "Okay." "Okay," Damian said, "just okay." Went back to his book. She paused again. Maya cried for 40 minutes, not because she was sad, because she was angry that Noah had gotten a father and she hadn't realized it sooner, and she wanted to know if she could come to your house and see it, because she's been telling her class that she has 2 houses, but she'd been lying and now she could stop lying. Elena said this last part with the slightly dazed quality of a parent reporting the internal logic of a 6-year-old girl, and this time the almost smile made it all the way across her face, briefly, and landed. Damian felt what that did to him, which was considerable, and kept his hands on the table. "Maya sounds like someone I'd like to meet," he said. "She is absolutely going to destroy you," Elena said. "She has no fear response, and she will say anything to anyone. You've been warned." "I've been warned," he said. She looked at him. The cafe noise moved around them. The coffee machine, a conversation, a child at another table dropping something with a clatter, and the sound of a parent responding. The ordinary Saturday morning of an ordinary neighborhood cafe, proceeding without drama. "I'm not asking you for anything," Damian said. "I want to say that clearly. I'm not sitting here with an expectation. I know what I did, and I know how long ago it was, and I know that 9 years of a life being built without me is not something that has a fast solution or maybe any solution. I'm here because I want to be here, and I'll keep coming if you let me come, and if you tell me to stop, I'll stop." "I'm not going to tell you to stop," Elena said. She said it simply, the way she said things when she was done negotiating with herself about them. "I'm also not telling you what this is or what it becomes. I don't know that yet." "That's enough," he said. "Is it?" He looked at her across the table in the morning light of the cafe with her name on the door. "Yes," he said. The first Saturday he met Maya and Noah was in late January, cold and bright, the kind of Chicago morning that has no mercy in it but is beautiful because of that. The sky a hard, clean blue above the buildings. Elena brought them to the cafe at 10 after their Saturday morning swim class, both of them in winter coats and damp hair, and the specific high-energy state of children who have been in water for an hour and are now fully combustible. Maya came through the door first at a pace that suggested the concept of walking was something she tolerated rather than embraced. Looked around the cafe, identified Damian at his table immediately with the accuracy of a person who had already formed a complete mental image from available descriptions, and walked directly to him. She stopped 2 feet from his table and looked at him with dark, serious eyes and said, "You're taller than I thought." "Is that good or bad?" he said. She considered this with genuine analytical effort. "Good," she decided. "Noah said you'd be scary. You don't look scary." "Noah said that," Damian said. "He said probably scary," Maya clarified with the precision of a person who takes accuracy seriously. "He said probably because he didn't know. Are you?" Damian looked at this 6-year-old girl who had Elena's directness and his bone structure and absolutely no interest in anything except the truth as she understood it, and he said, "Not to you." She appeared to find this acceptable. She climbed onto the chair across from him without being invited and pulled her coat off one arm at a time, dropping it on the table between them. "I'm Maya," she said. "I've been to 2 houses before. My friend Priya has 2 houses. She says it's annoying, but she gets 2 Christmas mornings, so she doesn't actually think it's that bad. That seems like a reasonable position, Damian said. Noah arrived at the table at the more measured pace of a child who had decided to see what the situation was before committing to it. He stood at the edge of the table and looked at Damian with his father's eyes, that watchful, unhurried assessment, and Damian looked back at him and let him look, and did not perform anything, did not lean forward or smile with the manufactured warmth of an adult trying to make a child comfortable. He just looked back. Noah sat down. "Hi," he said. "Hi," Damian said. "Do you like chess?" Noah said. "I know how to play," Damian said. "I haven't played in a long time." Noah nodded slowly, filing this. "I'm learning," he said. "My teacher says I'm good at thinking ahead, but I want to go fast, and that's the problem. She says patience is a skill you practice." "Your teacher is right," Damian said. Noah looked at him for a moment longer. Then he picked up the menu that was sitting on the table. Though Damian had been coming to this cafe for 6 Saturdays, and the menu had not changed, and Noah probably knew every item on it. He read it with the focused attention of a boy who needed a moment of familiar activity while he processed an unfamiliar situation, and Damian recognized this completely, recognized it in the marrow, and said nothing and let him read. Elena sat down beside Maya and unzipped her own coat and looked across the table at Damian with an expression he couldn't fully read and didn't try to, because some expressions needed time and distance to become legible, and this was one of them. The young woman came to take their order. Maya ordered hot chocolate and a muffin with the confidence of someone who had made this decision before arriving. Noah ordered the same thing without looking up from the menu. Elena ordered coffee, black. Damian held up his empty cup and said he was fine, and the young woman nodded and left. "Noah," Maya said, with the tone of someone about to adjudicate something, "you said probably scary." "He's not scary." "I said probably," Noah said, still looking at the menu. "But you were wrong." "I said probably," Noah said. "Probably means I might be wrong. That's why you say probably." Damian looked at Elena. Elena was looking at her coffee as it was being set down, but the corners of her mouth were doing something she was controlling with effort. "He's not wrong," Damian said. "Probably is good thinking." Noah set down the menu and looked at him with an expression that was not quite a smile but was in the vicinity of one. The expression of a child who has been told his logic holds, and is absorbing this with the specific satisfaction of the methodical. They sat in the cafe for an hour and 20 minutes. Maya talked without measurable pause about her swim class, her friend Priya's new dog, a conflict at school involving a set of colored pencils that had been misappropriated and not yet returned to their rightful owner, and her theory about why the moon looked bigger near the horizon. Noah contributed precise additions and occasional corrections to Maya's account of events, with the focused economy of a person who speaks when accuracy requires it and otherwise conserves. Damian listened to both of them and responded and asked questions that were genuine rather than performed, because he found, sitting at this table, that he did not need to perform interest. The interest was simply there, present and actual, the way hunger is present when you've been without food for longer than you realized. Elena watched him with the children and said less than she usually said, and held her coffee cup the way she held things when she was thinking rather than doing. When they left, Maya took his hand at the door with the breezy ownership of a child who has decided someone belongs in her life and is not going to make a production of the decision. She held it for the 10 steps between the cafe door and the sidewalk, and then released it and grabbed her mother's arm instead, already talking about something else, the contact casual and total and over in seconds. Those 10 steps took something from Damian that he did not try to get back. On the sidewalk, Noah stood beside him for a moment while Elena got Maya sorted into her coat. He looked up at Damian with the serious, measurement-taking eyes. "Will you be here next Saturday?" he said. "Yes," Damian said. Noah nodded once, the nod of a person recording information for future reference. "Okay," he said, and went to his mother. Damian watched them go down the sidewalk, the 4 of them casting 4 shadows in the winter light, and then 3, and then they turned the corner. Spring came to the neighborhood the way it always came, reluctantly, in stages, the cold not giving way so much as being gradually outnumbered by warmth. The trees on Greenview put out leaves in the tentative testing way of living things that know the temperature could still turn on them. Damian signed the final transfer documentation on a Thursday in March. Ortega was there. Steele's attorney was there. The federal escrow was confirmed, and the destruction documentation signed by the neutral attorney. It was, by the standards of what it represented, a remarkably undramatic event, papers and signatures, and the quiet closing of a chapter that had taken 30 years to write. He walked out of the attorney's office into a gray March afternoon and stood on the sidewalk and checked his phone and found a message from Elena, sent an hour earlier, a photograph of Noah and Maya in the backyard of a house she'd apparently started looking at in Evanston, not far from where they'd spent the night after the extraction. Noah was standing very straight, looking at the camera with that serious assessment. Maya was in motion, blurred at the edges, already leaving the frame. Behind them, the yard was bare and brown with the beginning of spring, and the sky was the same gray as the afternoon around Damian. He looked at the photograph for a long time. Then he typed, "The yard needs work. I could help with that if you wanted." He put his phone in his pocket and started walking. She replied 4 minutes later, which he knew because he checked. The reply was a single line, "Saturday, bring boots." He kept walking. The city moved around him with its usual indifference, its traffic and its noise and its 10,000 lives proceeding simultaneously without awareness of each other, and Damian Voss walked through it like a man walking through something he is no longer afraid of, not because it had become less than it was, but because what he was walking toward had become more. The yard took 3 Saturdays. The first Saturday it was still cold enough that their breath made small clouds in the air, and Maya supervised with a seriousness of purpose that was not related to any actual knowledge of yard work, but expressed itself as extremely specific opinions about where things should go. Noah helped Damian move the broken sections of fence in the back corner without being asked, picking up the heavier end without announcing it, the gesture of a boy who notices what needs doing and does it. Damian noticed this and said nothing about it, which was the right response, and the boy knew it was the right response, and something passed between them in that silent recognition that was not large and was not small. The second Saturday, Elena came outside with coffee for the 2 of them. The children were at a birthday party, and she sat on the back steps and watched him work on the garden bed along the south wall, which had been neglected long enough that the soil was compacted and needed to be turned by hand. And she said after a while, "You're going to be sore tomorrow." "I'm already sore," he said. She laughed. He had not heard her laugh since before everything that had happened, since the versions of them that had existed 9 years ago, and the sound of it moved through him with the quality of something returning rather than something new. He kept working. On the 3rd Saturday, the weather broke into something genuinely warm for the first time, and Maya came outside and walked directly to the garden bed and crouched down and put her hands in the turned soil with the complete lack of hesitation of a child for whom the world is primarily tactile, and she came up with 2 fists of dirt and looked at it with the expression of someone conducting serious research. "Things grow in here?" she said. "If you put the right things in," Damian said. What are the right things?" "Depends on what you want to grow," he said. She considered this with the analytical intensity she brought to everything. Then she opened her hands and let the dirt fall back, stood up, wiped her palms on her pants. Elena, from the steps, made a sound that was half protest and half resignation, and said, "I want tomatoes, and something purple." "We can do that," Damian said. "We," Maya said. She said the word with the specific attention of a 6-year-old who has noticed something. "You're coming back?" "If that's okay," he said. She looked at him for a moment. Then she looked at her mother on the steps. Then she looked back at Damian with the frank, unguarded directness that had been her operating mode since the first day he met her, the mode that had no room in it for anything except what was actually true. "Yeah," she said. "That's okay." And she went inside to wash her hands, the screen door banging behind her with the sound of a house that is lived in. Noah came and stood beside Damian at the garden bed and looked at the turned soil. "She's going to forget about the tomatoes," he said. "She always does. She wanted a fish tank for 6 months, and then we got it and she lost interest in 2 weeks." "That's okay," Damian said. "The tomatoes will still grow." Noah thought about this. "Even if she forgets to water them?" "That's what I'm here for," Damian said. Noah was quiet for a moment, looking at the dark soil, his hands in his pockets, his serious profile turned away. Then he said very quietly, not looking up, "Okay. Just that. Okay." The word of a boy who thought carefully before he gave anything and had given this. Damian kept his eyes on the garden bed and said nothing, and let the word be what it was, which was everything. Elena was still on the steps. He could feel her there without looking. The afternoon was warm and the yard was beginning to look like a place where something could be tended, and the city went on doing what cities do beyond the fence. And 3 weeks from now they would plant tomatoes and something purple. And by July the garden bed would be producing things that required watering and attention and the particular willingness to show up for something day after day without being certain of the outcome. He was willing. This was not the ending he had built his life toward. He had not built his life toward an ending at all. He had built it toward perpetuation, toward the maintenance and expansion of a structure that would continue indefinitely, outlasting the particular man inside it through the pure momentum of what had been assembled. He had built something large and controlled and armored, and it had cost him a woman who loved him, and a boy who thought carefully before he trusted, and a girl who ran at everything without fear response. And those costs had been invisible to him for 9 years because he had built the armor specifically so he would not have to see them. The armor was gone now. What was left was a man standing in a backyard in early spring with dirt on his hands and a boy beside him who had just said okay, and a woman on the steps who had not told him to leave. And somewhere inside the house the sound of water running as a 6-year-old washed her hands, and all of it temporary, all of it fragile, all of it requiring tending in the way that fragile things require tending. Not the cold maintenance of a structure engineered to last, but the warm, daily, uncertain attention of someone who understands that the thing they're caring for could still fail and chooses to show up for it anyway. He reached down and picked up a handful of the turned soil. It was dark and cold and dense with the compressed history of things that had grown and died and broken down in this ground, and it smelled like the particular aliveness of earth in spring. And he held it for a moment and then opened his hand and let it fall. He would be here next Saturday, and the one after that. That was enough. It was the most honest thing he had to offer, and it turned out that honesty, given consistently, in the right direction, over enough time, was not a small thing at all. Elena stood up from the steps and came into the yard, and she stood beside him and looked at the garden bed, and neither of them said anything because there was nothing that needed to be said, because the afternoon was warm and the ground was ready, and they were both, finally, standing in the same place at the same time without armor between them. And that was what the years had cost, and what the years had built, and it was real, and it was theirs. She looked at him. The cafe noise moved around them. The coffee machine, a conversation, a child at another table dropping something with a clatter, and the sound of a parent responding. The ordinary Saturday morning of an ordinary neighborhood cafe, proceeding without drama. "I'm not asking you for anything," Damian said. "I want to say that clearly. I'm not sitting here with an expectation. I know what I did, and I know how long ago it was, and I know that 9 years of a life being built without me is not something that has a fast solution, or maybe any solution. I'm here because I want to be here, and I'll keep coming if you let me come, and if you tell me to stop, I'll stop." "I'm not going to tell you to stop," Elena said. She said it simply, the way she said things when she was done negotiating with herself about them. "I'm also not telling you what this is or what it becomes. I don't know that yet." "That's enough," he said. "Is it?" He looked at her across the table in the morning light of the cafe with her name on the door. "Yes," he said. The first Saturday he met Maya and Noah was in late January, cold and bright. The kind of Chicago morning that has no mercy in it, but is beautiful because of that. The sky a hard, clean blue above the buildings. Elena brought them to the cafe at 10, after their Saturday morning swim class, both of them in winter coats and damp hair, and the specific high-energy state of children who have been in water for an hour and are now fully combustible. Maya came through the door first at a pace that suggested the concept of walking was something she tolerated rather than embraced. Looked around the cafe, identified Damian at his table immediately with the accuracy of a person who had already formed a complete mental image from available descriptions, and walked directly to him. She stopped 2 feet from his table and looked at him with dark, serious eyes and said, "You're taller than I thought." "Is that good or bad?" he said. She considered this with genuine analytical effort. "Good," she decided. "Noah said you'd be scary. You don't look scary." "Noah said that," Damian said. "He said probably scary," Maya clarified with the precision of a person who takes accuracy seriously. He said probably because he didn't know. Are you? Damian looked at this 6-year-old girl who had Elena's directness and his bone structure and absolutely no interest in anything except the truth as she understood it, and he said, "Not to you." She appeared to find this acceptable. She climbed onto the chair across from him without being invited and pulled her coat off one arm at a time, dropping it on the table between them. "I'm Maya," she said. "I've been to 2 houses before. My friend Priya has 2 houses. She says it's annoying, but she gets 2 Christmas mornings, so she doesn't actually think it's that bad." "That seems like a reasonable position," Damian said. Noah arrived at the table at the more measured pace of a child who had decided to see what the situation was before committing to it. He stood at the edge of the table and looked at Damian with his father's eyes, that watchful, unhurried assessment, and Damian looked back at him and let him look, and did not perform anything, did not lean forward or smile with the manufactured warmth of an adult trying to make a child comfortable. He just looked back. Noah sat down. "Hi," he said. "Hi," Damian said. "Do you like chess?" Noah said. "I know how to play," Damian said. "I haven't played in a long time." Noah nodded slowly, filing this. "I'm learning," he said. "My teacher says I'm good at thinking ahead, but I want to go fast, and that's the problem. She says patience is a skill you practice." "Your teacher is right," Damian said. Noah looked at him for a moment longer. Then he picked up the menu that was sitting on the table. Though Damian had been coming to this cafe for 6 Saturdays, and the menu had not changed, and Noah probably knew every item on it. He read it with the focused attention of a boy who needed a moment of familiar activity while he processed an unfamiliar situation, and Damian recognized this completely, recognized it in the marrow, and said nothing and let him read. Elena sat down beside Maya and unzipped her own coat and looked across the table at Damian with an expression he couldn't fully read and didn't try to, because some expressions needed time and distance to become legible, and this was one of them. The young woman came to take their order. Maya ordered hot chocolate and a muffin with the confidence of someone who had made this decision before arriving. Noah ordered the same thing without looking up from the menu. Elena ordered coffee, black. Damian held up his empty cup and said he was fine, and the young woman nodded and left. "Noah," Maya said, with the tone of someone about to adjudicate something. "You said probably scary. He's not scary." "I said probably," Noah said, still looking at the menu. "But you were wrong." "I said probably," Noah said. "Probably means I might be wrong. That's why you say probably." Damian looked at Elena. Elena was looking at her coffee as it was being set down, but the corners of her mouth were doing something she was controlling with effort. "He's not wrong," Damian said. "Probably is good thinking." Noah set down the menu and looked at him with an expression that was not quite a smile but was in the vicinity of one. The expression of a child who has been told his logic holds and is absorbing this with the specific satisfaction of the methodical. They sat in the cafe for an hour and 20 minutes. Maya talked without measurable pause about her swim class, her friend Priya's new dog, a conflict at school involving a set of colored pencils that had been misappropriated and not yet returned to their rightful owner, and her theory about why the moon looked bigger near the horizon. Noah contributed precise additions and occasional corrections to Maya's account of events, with the focused economy of a person who speaks when accuracy requires it and otherwise conserves. Damian listened to both of them and responded and asked questions that were genuine rather than performed because he found, sitting at this table, that he did not need to perform interest. The interest was simply there, present and actual, the way hunger is present when you've been without food for longer than you realized. Elena watched him with the children and said less than she usually said, and held her coffee cup the way she held things when she was thinking rather than doing. When they left, Maya took his hand at the door with the breezy ownership of a child who has decided someone belongs in her life and is not going to make a production of the decision. She held it for the 10 steps between the cafe door and the sidewalk, and then released it and grabbed her mother's arm instead, already talking about something else, the contact casual and total and over in seconds. Those 10 steps took something from Damian that he did not try to get back. On the sidewalk, Noah stood beside him for a moment while Elena got Maya sorted into her coat. He looked up at Damian with the serious, measurement-taking eyes. "Will you be here next Saturday?" he said. "Yes," Damian said. Noah nodded once, the nod of a person recording information for future reference. "Okay," he said, and went to his mother. Damian watched them go down the sidewalk, the four of them casting 4 shadows in the winter light, and then 3, and then they turned the corner. Spring came to the neighborhood the way it always came, reluctantly, in stages, the cold not giving way so much as being gradually outnumbered by warmth. The trees on Greenview put out leaves in the tentative, testing way of living things that know the temperature could still turn on them. Damian signed the final transfer documentation on a Thursday in March. Ortega was there. Steele's attorney was there. The federal escrow was confirmed, and the destruction documentation signed by the neutral attorney. It was, by the standards of what it represented, a remarkably undramatic event, papers and signatures, and the quiet closing of a chapter that had taken 30 years to write. He walked out of the attorney's office into a gray March afternoon and stood on the sidewalk and checked his phone and found a message from Elena, sent an hour earlier, a photograph of Noah and Maya in the backyard of a house she'd apparently started looking at in Evanston, not far from where they'd spent the night after the extraction. Noah was standing very straight, looking at the camera with that serious assessment. Maya was in motion, blurred at the edges, already leaving the frame. Behind them the yard was bare and brown with the beginning of spring, and the sky was the same gray as the afternoon around Damian. He looked at the photograph for a long time. Then he typed, "The yard needs work. I could help with that if you wanted." He put his phone in his pocket and started walking. She replied 4 minutes later, which he knew because he checked. The reply was a single line, "Saturday, bring boots." He kept walking. The city moved around him with its usual indifference, its traffic and its noise and its 10,000 lives proceeding simultaneously without awareness of each other, and Damian Voss walked through it like a man walking through something he is no longer afraid of, not because it had become less than it was, but because what he was walking toward had become more. The yard took 3 Saturdays. The first Saturday it was still cold enough that their breath made small clouds in the air, and Maya supervised with a seriousness of purpose that was not related to any actual knowledge of yard work, but expressed itself as extremely specific opinions about where things should go. Noah helped Damian move the broken sections of fence in the back corner without being asked, picking up the heavier end without announcing it, the gesture of a boy who notices what needs doing and does it. Damian noticed this and said nothing about it, which was the right response, and the boy knew it was the right response. And something passed between them in that silent recognition that was not large and was not small. The second Saturday, Elena came outside with coffee for the 2 of them. The children were at a birthday party, and she sat on the back steps and watched him work on the garden bed along the south wall, which had been neglected long enough that the soil was compacted and needed to be turned by hand. And she said, after a while, "You're going to be sore tomorrow." "I'm already sore," he said. She laughed. He had not heard her laugh since before everything that had happened, since the versions of them that had existed 9 years ago, and the sound of it moved through him with the quality of something returning rather than something new. He kept working. On the 3rd Saturday, the weather broke into something genuinely warm for the first time, and Maya came outside and walked directly to the garden bed and crouched down and put her hands in the turned soil with the complete lack of hesitation of a child for whom the world is primarily tactile. And she came up with 2 fists of dirt and looked at it with the expression of someone conducting serious research.